everyone. Thank you for joining us for our May DEI committee meeting. We have a few items on our agenda today, but first we will begin with roll call. So Heather, if you can do that, please.
Sure. Sabula,
Present.
Lyra,
Present.
Robinson, Roberts, Smith, Hess,
Present.
Geyer,
Present.
Yang,
Here.
Lee,
Present.
Scott,
Present.
Christensen, Council Representative Mayor Lori Palmieri,
Here.
Staff Representative Michelle Banky,
Here.
and Assistant City Manager John Fitzpatrick.
Here.
Perfect. And then I see Beth, you are here. Awesome.
Thank you, Heather. Before we begin our meeting, I would like to take a moment to share a land acknowledgement, and then we will bring it to the table for discussion. But I would like to begin by stating, we are gathered here on the lands that were originally home to the Menominee and the Ho-Chunk nations. We honor the Menominee and Ho-Chunk communities and are grateful for their stewardship of the land and waters. We acknowledge these ancestral grounds as sacred and remember the complex history of settler colonialism on these lands and the effects that persist today. We commit to a restorative and healing relationship with the original inhabitants in our community. So the first item on our agenda is a land acknowledgement. Can we have someone bring forward a motion to discuss this and put it on the table for discussion?
I think, Angie, that was just the statement that you just made. That was our understanding when we put the agenda together.
Thank you, John, for that. But I would like to bring it to discussion because I would like to begin each of our meetings with the land acknowledgement going forward.
Gotcha.
So I would like to discuss that.
I'd like to make a motion to have a discussion about this item.
I'll second.
Thank you. Heather, can you please take roll?
Sabula,
Aye.
No,
No, there's no need to take roll
no,
for
no
this.
motion,
Go
no
ahead.
Okay,
okay.
thank you.
discussion.
Thank you.
And then, yeah.
Okay, so we can now bring this up for discussion. So something that I've been reflecting and contemplating on is the role of having a land acknowledgement at the beginning of each of our meetings as a model for our committee, but also in the approach and the way we approach our meetings, but also the way we approach an acknowledgement and honoring and setting that precedent for not just our committee, but for others. And so that's the rationale behind bringing this forward. And I would love to hear other people's thoughts.
I think it's a very good idea. My question is this something that comes from documents already written? Is it something that one person writes? Is it a round robin that each committee would be responsible, each person? How would that work?
Carmen, those are really good questions and items that I would love to discuss. The one I know that Mary Palmieri began our special meeting with her own written land acknowledgement. I wrote today's, and if this is something that we would love to rotate and others would like to begin each meeting, that I think that would be wonderful as well. Or we can write a statement as our committee, just one communal statement, and then either I or Ashley or anyone else can read it at the beginning of each meeting. So it's all up in the air. So we can decide that as a committee.
I'm sorry, could you read it again, please?
The land acknowledgement?
Yeah,
Yes. We are gathered here on the lands that were originally home to the Menominee and Ho-Chunk nations. We honor the Menominee and Ho-Chunk communities and are grateful for their stewardship of the land and waters. We acknowledge these ancestral grounds as sacred and remember the complex history of settler colonialism on these lands and the effects that persist today. We commit to a restorative and healing relationship of the original inhabitants and our community.
thank you.
If Heather, if you can allow me to share my screen, I have something that maybe we can look at as a group of just some questions to reflect on as we discuss this. Am I able to do that, Heather?
This is Courtney. Angie, you are able to do that.
Oh.
I just made you presenter.
Thank you. All right. Okay. Can everyone see this?
Mhm.
Okay. So I will just scroll slowly.
You know, if I may, Angie, I appreciate what you put together there, and I wasn't able to participate in the special meeting, so I'll acknowledge that as well. So I wasn't able to hear the other one, but these land acknowledgements are not uncommon. They are popping up in many areas of the country as a standard government to government acknowledgement in some ways between a local municipal government and the existing sovereign nations of the state or region. Um, I think if this is personally going to be something we would include in a just opening welcome statement to these meetings, I would like for it to be, I think a land acknowledgement is appropriate, but perhaps we could also further ground this in the purpose and, add some additional language. So it's not just up to every individual, because I think that's a little too much pressure and that'd be, perhaps even inappropriate in some ways. But from my opinion and perspective, I would suggest that, perhaps we would consider something a little more like not land acknowledgement. I think it's very important, but also kind of also remind ourselves each and every time we come together, and for any of the public that would wish to join us, the purpose and of this committee. So maybe work in some of our uh, our mission statement as well. I think the two joined together might be an appropriate way of just always grounding us and getting our minds and our hearts together in the one purpose for this meeting. I think that might be an important reminder if we're going to go forward with such a concept. And that's all I'll say. But round it out more, perhaps. Not to
Thank you,
dilute one or the
Ashley.
other, but really to be more inclusive.
Absolutely more mindful.
Perhaps.
Yeah, I was going to say that as much as I appreciate that, I think that we have to be a little more broad in our in our inclusion.
Thank you, Joaquin. I'll keep scrolling. there's one other website that I brought up. Would you like to see that as well? We can just kind of look through that as well. And, maybe what I'll do is I can send some links as well as resources as if we decide to put one together as a committee. I can put links to some of these resources and to guide us in our work in writing this.
And I'm just noticing here on this website, Angie, if you could stop for just a moment.
Sure.
That second bullet point there, I think kind of relates back to what Joaquin was referencing. How does this acknowledgement relate to the event or work you're doing? So appreciate you sharing this. I had seen the first website, but I had not seen this. So thanks for sharing that.
So we'll go ahead and, Courtney, we can go ahead and close the sharing. I'll definitely share these links with you among others, but just to give you just a little bit of background information. Oh, I have to, okay, there. So it sounds like maybe we would like to have a collective land or just one for the group. Have we decided on that? Okay, so maybe something that's written as a group. And I appreciate both Ashley and Joaquin's points of it being inclusive and sharing the reason why and weaving in our mission and the work that we do is part of that as well. Any other thoughts on having this be part of our agenda each week and starting each meeting with a land acknowledgement?
And this is Ashley, and I thank you for bringing it up. And I do think it would be, for us to do this, we could craft our own opening statement. I think it would be very pithy and always a good reminder to ground everyone. And I think including a land acknowledgement of some nature or another in there would be appropriate, but personally, so I think, I would like to make a motion to put this, perhaps on next month's agenda. Maybe you can share the resources to give us some time to think about it. And similar to as we've done before, start kind of drafting and crafting. We can, but I would like to at least continue this discussion perhaps, and formally sort of make a motion to, proceed with crafting an opening statement, just for the purpose of DEI, and then we can, perhaps consider making other recommendations to the city government proper, related to land acknowledgements. But I think for our purpose, to get in the context of our work would be important. So no, that wasn't a very pithy and direct motion, but yeah, I'd like to just move that we kind of address this in our next meeting and perhaps come to the table to see where we land with some ideas and perhaps a draft for all of us to kind of look through. That's a little more inclusive of what Joaquin and I at least had put forward, unless anyone has other additions.
It was very well stated, and I like the idea of also communicating with the city for their meetings as well, that it's not unique to this committee. I really, really like that idea. And I also like, and I don't remember who shared that, also opening it with our mission statement so that we always walk into a meeting knowing what our mission is. Our lives are so busy. We are all doing many things and we rush here at the 11th hour. And I know I'm not grounded when I walk into a meeting because I just came out of a meeting or I just came out of something. So I really like that time to be grounded. And I do like the idea of further discussion, similar to what we did with the mission statement, where we all go back and reflect. And I think those links are great. And it would be a starting point, particularly for those of us who are new to this, new to Wisconsin, new to this whole process of Native Americans and what they went through, and that it's not just history, it's present, it's always going to be, and we need to acknowledge that.
So if I may, just to share, at council, at each of our meetings, we start with after roll call, an invocation. And there is kind of a generic brief statement for an invocation at each of our meetings, but each council member, it rotates whose turn it is to read the invocation. But certainly council members, some of us in the past have made more specific ones, but then it was included in our packet each time, that invocation to kind of launch the general intention of the meeting for the greater good and, discernment in our decisions. So that's one other way that if you chose to, you could. But if I could just ask Ashley, so is your motion to lay this over for the next meeting, or did you say your motion is for us to, or for this body to plan to have the land acknowledgement, but at a later meeting develop that language?
Yeah, I apologize for not being so clear. It really, I was trying to include a land acknowledgement within a greater opening statement for the DEI committee, so that we could have our own, as you maybe say, invocation, our own opening grounding statement for ourselves, inclusive of a land acknowledgement. But yes, I would like to continue this discussion at our next meeting, see where we are, perhaps with some additional time for all of us to collectively wrap our heads around it. To me, that seemed appropriate. But yes.
Do we have a second on that motion?
Second the motion.
Okay. Other discussion points, questions?
So what I
Courtney,
hear is that there's a motion to put developing an opening statement, including a land acknowledgement at our next DEI meeting. Is that correct?
Correct.
Yes.
I don't want to be picky about the wording of it, but are we developing it at the next meeting? Or I know Ashley mentioned about potentially looking at a draft of it, so we're not spending so much time in our meeting. He just said something about a draft, but to me, there could be a lot of meeting time spent on what exactly that is. It'd be nice if there was a subgroup who could develop a draft for us to review. But that's just my opinion on the current resolution.
No, I guess I wasn't trying to be prescriptive as to how we undertook it. We've developed different a mission statement, other documents thus far. We could start it as a subcommittee. Wasn't gonna, yeah. How we get it done, that's kind of up to us to decide, you know, but I think by next meeting, yeah, the intent would be to have something for us to look at as a group. You know, thus a draft. That was what I said, but
I can send out a draft as a in the Google Doc and open up access to everyone. And you are welcome to add input, thoughts, and we can review it at our next meeting and have some time to review that and provide feedback. And from there, if we are ready, you know, publish it. Otherwise, we can spend another meeting. It doesn't have to, you know, I don't feel that this has to be rushed. I think these conversations are important and hearing various perspectives is important as well. So are we okay with me sending out a draft in the Google Doc and from there going from there?
Yes, I think it's a great idea.
All right.
I would just add too, you know, in terms of you placing things on the agenda, you don't necessarily need to provide a motion and vote on it. You can just talk to Chairperson Lee, and she can ask us to place it on the agenda also. So don't feel like you're limited by the process to place items on the agenda. You can just speak to Chairperson Lee, and Michelle will be happy to help with that.
Yep, we can certainly add that to the next agenda per all of your interests. And I think we've got a note on putting that on.
Are we ready to vote? Okay. Courtney?
Heather, this is Heather. I'll take the vote. Sabula,
Aye.
Lyra,
Aye.
Roberts,
I,
Hess,
I,
Geyer,
Aye.
Yang,
I,
Scott,
I
Lee.
Aye.
Perfect.
Thank you, Heather. Okay. Next on the agenda is to approve the minutes from our special meeting on May 17th. So I will open that up for discussion, questions.
I move to approve the minutes from last meeting.
Second.
Anything to discuss? Okay, so we have a motion to approve the minutes. Heather, will you take roll, please?
Sabula,
Aye.
Lyra,
Aye.
Roberts,
I,
Hess,
I,
Geyer,
Aye.
Yang,
I,
Scott,
I
Lee.
Aye.
Perfect.
Okay, thank you, Heather. Next on our agenda is citizen statements and comments to our committee. Do we have anyone registered?
I did not have anyone register or express interest to speak to us today.
Okay. All right. Then we can move on to discuss use of FEI for plan facilitation. So just to kind of recap, this was a couple months ago, we heard a presentation from Raquel Salone of FEI, and let me just pull up my notes as well. So she is part of the Alliance for Strong Families. Just some notes that I wrote down from her presentation, talking about equity as the center of their work. She's currently working with the city, and John, please feel free to add to this. She's currently working with the city on assessments and strategic planning and development and some of the metrics. And so we had decided as a committee that because she is already working with the city, that it would probably be smoother and just more coherent to have her also work with us in working towards a plan for our committee. But I'd like to hear other people's thoughts on utilizing their organization.
This is Ashley. So, originally my thought is again, was to make use of their technical expertise or time to start drafting our recommendations, our city plan, our plan for diversity, equity, and inclusion. We have a document that needs to be crafted, and I believe that was what was under consideration, making use of their services if that was appropriate. Like, but first we need to understand who they were and what she's capable of doing. So given the fact, if they're capable of helping us to pull together our inputs and organize it and structure it in a way to meet the obligations that we have, but also to meet, what we advise our city entities to address related to housing and economic mobility and issues of concern around all kinds of health equity and all kinds of measures that make Oshkosh a wonderful city. And we want to make sure everyone has access and the ability to thrive here. We have so many people that move here. So there's a lot of areas that we can advise. And so I understood that we are going to explore this group's, ability to help us actually produce what it is we're being asked to produce as an advisory body. We are not paid employees or, council or, a proper. And so it's to ask us to undertake this and do that. We can get things together. I know we all have thoughts and ideas, and we put together a document to initiate this discussion. It's out there on a drive for everyone to start putting some of their thoughts or ideas around, what we want to do. So as long as that's kind of in the frame and the understanding that I have, if that's accurate, like if that's what we're considering, I think then let's consider pursuing them if they're already under contract. But if they're not able to really do that, then we have other alternatives to explore, I believe, within our city, other community resources that might be able to help us at least just put some thoughts to paper, give us some structure to work with, and really get this moving and produce our report. I know I'm talking in circles perhaps, but I really like, if that's what we're talking about using FEI for, then I think we consider moving ahead on what does it take to get some hours out of them? Do they have to amend their contract? And there's all these logistical things I'm sure that have to be addressed. So I don't know if anyone else has thoughts or recollection of what that meeting had been, because as you noted, it was already several months back.
I guess one thing I'm curious about, John or Michelle, you can maybe fill us in. One, how long has the city been working with FEI? Like, two, like where are you in the process? Like what work have you done already, and what do you see as maybe the next steps that the city is pursuing in your connection with FEI, and what other guidance or comments can you provide us as far as what that plan going forward might look like?
Certainly, and we've been working with FEI since late last year. I believe it was approved. And the first thing that they worked with us on was an internal assessment from our employees. We completed that, and Wednesday, we're actually doing a full day of training with all of our leaders regarding diversity, equity, and inclusion, so that we can start talking the same language And we will then be going into a planning session the next day for our leaders to, look at what can they do within their departments to drive the diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives. So we're actually going to be spending 2 days with them in person for the first time this week. And from there, obviously, we want to be able to take our diversity, equity, and inclusion plan and have them implement improvements or I guess, a plan for the city in its entirety, as well as in their individual departments. So we're very excited about working with them these next couple of days in person. Obviously, it's been a very long year of COVID with not being able to meet in person with people. So I expect we're going to accomplish a lot this week in really helping our organization be ready to drive our initiatives forward.
Well, that's very good to know. I appreciate that update. I think as do the rest of our committee on this front, because that will give us something to advise on, as opposed to just sort of shot in the dark. Say, we know what the strategic plan is for the city as far as general categories and buckets, but as far as being able to advise and carry forth our duty, I think what you're describing sounds like it would give us something to respond to. Especially when it starts to carrying out and developing any plans, for the city proper, or, not going to micromanage, of course, anybody's work, because everybody has leaders, they do their own business. I get that, but there are specific issues that are addressing, oversee economic development, oversee, our public sea complex and things of that nature. So I would really look forward to seeing what is being produced in this, and hopefully working, and that was the other part, thank you for reminding me in this discussion, working with FBI would also then give us that direct ability to interface as you're progressing forward, that we can, and give us something to advise on, and make our recommendations to, in more of a responsive sort of, I think, an appropriate manner, in my opinion. But that's very good to hear, and it's exciting.
We're very excited because, again, this has been in the makings for quite a few months to actually, again, do training with all of our leaders, as well as sit down together and develop that detailed plan.
And just a follow-up question, Michelle or John, is it the expectation that at the end of the second day, I know part of the metrics that were assigned in this ordinance creating this committee related to giving feedback on department equity measures. And so is it the expectation at the end of that second day, there may be some drafts of those coming out of that, or is that later yet in the process?
The next two, or this week, is we're not expected to get metrics at this time. Obviously, we're doing a full day of training to get our leaders thinking about diversity, equity, and inclusion as they look at, obviously, our policies, procedures, how we do things internally. So I would expect that they're going to need to have a little time to really determine what those metrics need to look like. But that would be the next expected step, that we would be able to develop metrics for those departments, for every department. And I don't know if you have anything additional in your thoughts, but we also don't want to bite off too much in a day and a half.
Well,
Yeah, I think Michelle framed it pretty well. I can just add a few little details. The training is going to be on diversity, equity, and inclusion, civility in the workplace, implicit bias, and microaggressions. Those are the topics that are going to be covered. We've shared the results of the survey with the department heads. We're also going to be sharing the results of the survey with other division heads that are going to be present. And then after that training, the full day of the training session, the next day is going to be just devoted to having dialogue about development of our plan. What sorts of things do we need to do to make sure that everybody is speaking the same language at a similar level so they can have dialogue, and then through that dialogue develop some sort of a plan going forward, and then for all of our employees. And then when we get that participation from all of our employees, we'd like to include them, in the action items that are going to be necessary to help the plan become successful, and then finally develop the metrics. So that's kind of just a little more detail. Hopefully it's helpful, but it's a process that's very similar to what we do with our strategic plan, and being inclusive with our employees, helping them understand why this is so important, has really served us well in that context, and we think that it's very relatable to this process too. So that's really the thought process behind it.
John, if I could just follow up, then I know last budget season, it was council's expectation that we would start to see some of those draft equity metrics, and understandably that was delayed. So I guess my question is, since it doesn't sound like this committee will be receiving those initial draft thoughts, and it sounds like they're taking their time to do this right, would it be appropriate then for DEI committee to delay the council's expectation at the 1 year mark? Because that was a big piece of what was expected of this committee, to delay delivery of this plan. I think it was expected, around the July mark, but would it make sense to report that this would be delayed until like September or October? Or is that going to be an obstacle if there's some kind of recommendations around budget impacts?
Well, I think it's really a question for the council. I appreciate you asking me, but I think if you were to ask me also in front of the council, and I think this is why you're asking me in front of DEI, I think, and you already kind of hit on some of the answers that I would share. I think we do want to do it right. We do want to include everyone. And then, that also means interfacing, as Ashley said, with the DEI group, and making sure that they feel comfortable in understanding what we did, why we did it, providing feedback and input, and then, hopefully coming up with those measures in a manner where everybody feels comfortable with them and feels really good about it. So can we get it all done? I'm hopeful, but I think it's going to be a challenge for sure. I would appreciate it if we could, maybe just report on where we are, and I'm certainly happy to do that tomorrow or whenever. And I know you can also, Mayor Palmieri, in that part of the council meeting where we talk about, what's going on in the boards and commissions. And just so we give them a heads up in terms of where we're at and where DEI is at too, and how we want to try to, as Ashley said, bring everything together so we can be successful. That's the idea.
And I'm sorry, I didn't mean to derail the item that was on the floor about whether or not you guys were going to vote to work with FEI, but I just thought before you guys entertained that vote that you should know that, it may not be coming to us in the time period that we were expecting. And so I'm happy to report to council if this body decides yes, no, whatever in terms of FEI, but also, whether or not you want to extend the expectation of the product delivery.
Thank you,
Well,
Mary
Mayor.
Palmieri, for bringing that up. Oh, Ashley, do you want to go first? Oh. I guess one thing I'm wondering is whether it would be advantageous to include some members of the DEI committee in that work as advisory. It feels, and I would love to entertain other ideas and opinions on this, that if we are kind of an afterthought, or not an afterthought, but if we are consulted after the fact, it just feels that much more delayed. I wonder if including some of our opinions and voices and just having us at the table would help facilitate, that development. I don't know. I'd like to hear other people's thoughts on that as well.
Gee, on that front, and Mayor, thank you for putting those additional ideas and thoughts to the table. So I think really, as far as extending the request to the council, personally, I've not really wanted to go there because I'm stubborn and I think we can do this, but the reality is no. But I think at some point, what we can develop, we can at least get the structure, we can get a framework, we can get some things filled up, but absent having the actual, of the city for us to advise upon and those metrics and like really input on it directly, we can't produce the end. So an extension will likely be necessary, but how that's crafted, I think we should really think about that a little more collectively, is what I'm hearing, and really be real at this point about what we can accomplish and how to, convey that to the council. So I think it is very important. Angie, as far from in my opinion, it's always just my opinion, including DEI members in the city work as proper, I don't really know that it would be the most appropriate place because, from just the structure of our things, we are an advisory body. I think one of my goals, personal missions, would make this something more than just advisory at some point and make this a little more functional part of city government, because that's truly where the impacts would be had and be made. Now, that aside, until then, I don't really see it being an appropriate fit. But what I do see an appropriate fit is if we do work with FEI, is making a request and making that they are reporting in literally in time. Give us a report as to the progress, the summary, the challenges, the successes, some of the things. Like, I think it would be appropriate for them to give us a report, because we're not going to be in the day-to-day. We're not going to be at the trainings. I get that. There's a lot of things that need to be done, and you don't want to insert an outsider into something when you're dealing with staff. And that it's already could be potentially awkward enough, I think, and challenging enough. So I would not want to be something that hinders the work that needs to be done when it comes to the ground level stuff. But I do think it would be appropriate for us to request regular and timely reports about the progress and some insight to the extent that it can be shared. Especially when there's certain discussions I know won't be necessarily made public, but I think that would be an appropriate approach. I'd like anyone's thoughts or opinions on it. It'd be helpful. But that's part of the reason why I like the idea of working with FEI, because it's that direct link. I mean, Raquel's, I believe he said, she's already there, so she should be able to produce and report to us and keep us up to date and up to speed as to what's happening. It seems an appropriate role for her to play, especially if it's going to be inclusive, and like this makes sense.
And I'll just add, as members of the city too, we can certainly, and intend to keep you updated as we go through these developments. Again, this last year has been challenging for everyone in how quickly, you can accomplish things when you're remote, as we've all had that challenge. But certainly, I think it is our intent as the city staff to keep you guys updated as to our progress and, where we're going. Obviously, as we hopefully spend more time training our employees on these important areas that they don't have a lot of familiarity with. And of course, as we develop these plans, I appreciate your insight, Ashley, as to, letting the staff figure out what they need to do and then coming to you guys, because I think that has been our intent through this entire process.
I had similar thoughts as Ashley, and so I appreciate you voicing those. And I for one, I think it would make a whole lot of sense to kind of go the FEI route just for that continuity. And I think that would work really well to our advantage.
The question is still out there, though, to me, is this something that entity, that organization, whether it's Raquel or someone else, would they be able to work with us to develop our product, if you will, our report, and just help us to organize it and make it look good, make it, just do all that needs to be done. Is that a role that they could and would be able to, given what they're doing for the city? I mean, it seems like it'd be a slight add-on to their existing scope of work, most likely. So, I mean, that's the question that's there for me. Like, I really, my opinion, like, honestly, unless we got a volunteer in the group, somebody needs to be putting this all together. And I'd prefer to look really professional and be like top notch and set the bar and be that framework from this point forward is what I think we're all in the same mind. So I don't know, Michelle, or John or something, is that something that would be an appropriate role? And like, I mean, absent that, I don't know what we have anything to really vote for or against. I don't know if they can even do this yet.
Right, and we had voted to utilize them, but then there was some question whether or not that was what you wanted to do at this time, which is why it got back on the agenda. So, so realistically, we are ready to go forth and ask them to put a scope together for this additional add-on. Like you said, we do have some money allocated for DEI to have that facilitation done for you. And I do believe it is certainly something that they can help with. I think that especially as it, is helping you put together, what do you want to focus on? And again, capture all those ideas and help you sort through them. I think they would be very capable of doing that.
Okay.
So can I put forth a motion that we ask them to put that scope together for us?
I don't even know that we need a motion. Again, you guys already voted. So I can just have them do that and get back to you guys with an outline of what they propose for you. I held off again just because there seemed to be some hesitation if we were ready to move forward. So I didn't want to have them, do that scope and then us determine we weren't going to move forward at this time. So I will contact them. I'm going to see them in the next couple of days and tell them that you guys are ready to move forward as we had planned a couple months ago.
Thank you, Michelle. Then we don't need to vote on anything at this time?
Nope,
Correct.
you guys had already voted. Again, we just wanted to make sure everybody was comfortable.
Sure. Other thoughts from other members? Okay, thank you. That was a good discussion. Okay, I will move on then to the next agenda item, which is to discuss the transition to in-person meetings. Currently, I believe council is moving to in-person. Are other boards and committees also moving to in-person? Is that
So-
even a choice for us?
Yes. So tomorrow night will be the first evening that council is coming back all in person. The previous meeting where we voted on that, we said that we would leave it up to each board or committee as to whether or not they wanted to continue for some time in the virtual format or convert over to in person. Some committees, I can give an example, a committee on aging, their next meeting is all back in person. You know, there are those options, but I will also say that we did leave it that public participation would still be virtual. However, tomorrow, the first item on council's agenda is to vote on whether or not to go back to in person for that component too. So, yes, there are a number of committees that are going another month or two and then going to reevaluate, but it does appear that we have a number that are reconvening in person.
Yes, I can tell you, I am on the Police and Fire Commission, and they voted to go in person and had their first in-person meeting. Was it Tuesday this week or Tuesday last week? I'm sorry. No, it was last Thursday. So they were very excited to get back in person. But again, it has to be right for each individual committee. Like Mayor Palmieri said, they are leaving it up to the committees at this time as to whether or not they're ready to go in person or want to continue virtual for a time.
In-person meetings with people wearing masks or not?
My understanding, and John or Mayor Palmieri can indicate, at this time, meetings are required to wear masks, but I don't know if that is expected to change. I don't know if John or Mayor have any input on that.
Yes, so there's the city ordinance that was changed to end the citywide mask ordinance. There was the council meeting in person. It's kind of all separated out. And then there are the city building rules. There is no longer a requirement for masks in the city buildings except for public transit. And John, correct me if I'm wrong, if I'm missing something here. I believe the library also announced letting go of a mask requirement. Is that correct?
Yes, it is. And the YMCA as well. It's not city, but yeah, more and more of them.
Right.
So
The only
answer-
other little nuance with that would be, you know, we still recommend if people haven't been vaccinated that they wear masks.
Yes. So that's a long answer to your short question, Beth.
And Mayor Palmieri mentioned earlier too that the council is going to take up that issue of masks in meetings right away at the beginning of prior to their workshop, I think on Tuesday, right, Mayor? So that's still not finalized, that
Thank you.
piece.
So to be clear, masks are still required at these meetings until council changes that. Is that correct?
Not the committee meetings, because the committee meetings are still in flux, but in the city building, John, what is the current rule in the city building that masks are strongly encouraged if you are not vaccinated, but they are not required? Is that accurate?
That's correct.
That's accurate.
So we could meet, and if we're vaccinated, we don't have to wear a mask.
Correct.
Okay, just want to clarify that.
So Mayor Palmer, tomorrow's council meeting, now is that just gonna be for the council members in person, or what about citizens?
Let me just pull up the agenda real quick. I believe it's the first item on our, okay, so the first item for council is a workshop regarding our Clearwell water treatment facility. And then we will end that meeting. I'm sorry. Before the Clearwell workshop, we're having that discussion about, I'm trying to remember how it was titled. I don't have my
It's titled Amend Rules Pertaining to Council, Board, and Commission Meetings in Response to COVID-19 Coronavirus Emergency to Eliminate Face Covering Requirements. Staff recommends waiving the rules. So the council will have an opportunity to talk about not only council meetings, but they'll have an opportunity to also talk about board and commission meetings. You know, Joaquin, you kind of asked me kind of a half question in both those worlds, buildings and meetings, but depending upon what the council decides to do tomorrow, they could went into board and commission. And I think it was written that way to give the council that prerogative. So we'll see what they talk about tomorrow. But as far as buildings go, they're not required.
So Mi Yang was asking whether or not citizens participate in person at tomorrow's council meeting. And it could go either way, right? Because we could vote to go ahead and allow public to attend in person.
Right.
And then that meeting tomorrow night, people could come in person.
Yes, you could. Technically,
But there's also still the virtual link for public to participate also though, right?
yes.
Okay. That makes sense.
Okay.
I know it's confusing. It's a complex thing. So hopefully I'm glad it does make a little bit of sense.
So, I mean, I guess what we're asking is, do you want to go to in-person meetings? Are you ready to do that for June? Are you not ready to do that? Do you want to vote to go back? Do you want to, well, go back? You guys have never been in person. Do you want to vote to wait another month, you know, and review it again when you know more? You know, there's different directions. And of course, we could, as the council is doing, determine that we don't want citizen participation in person yet and keep that virtual for a time being, even though we haven't had much of that thus far. So it's really up to you guys what you're comfortable with. And then if these current meeting times and dates obviously stay intact, you know, at this time, it's the fourth Monday at 5:15 p.m. Once you are not virtual, to be honest with you, I don't know what that does for people's commuting schedules and such. So I think there's a lot for you guys to think about.
I personally would feel comfortable having the June meeting in person with citizen participation virtual for the time being. I'm open though to hear other people's thoughts.
I had the same thought, with the exception of starting it at 5:30 instead of 5:15.
I'm on board with that.
Does anyone have a strong opposition to going in person next
If we
month?
started at, excuse me, Angie, if we started at 5:30, is there a way that we can end at 7:30? Is there a reason why we have to have that extra 15 minutes? But I am on board with in person for our committee, virtual for citizens.
I think length of the meeting is really, you know, I guess myself and the chairperson managing what's on the agenda. If we try to keep the length to 2 hours, I think that's extremely reasonable. But in the end, it's really going to come down to what's on the agenda. Also, keeping in mind if we have public comment, those, they can each take 5 minutes. If you have 20 people who want to talk for 5 minutes, it can certainly add a lot to a meeting. So I completely understand what you're saying, Carmen, and would love to, have some sort of parameters, but I don't think we can ever guarantee that the meeting will end, much like the council meetings when they have public comment. You have to take the time to.
Oh, and I totally understand that. It's when we send out that agenda, do we say 5:30 to 7? Extend it as necessary, because we know in advance people have to register. So it shouldn't come as this huge surprise. And we're all on board, I would imagine, when we need to stay till 7:30, till 8 o'clock, till whatever. I think that if we start, the question is, if we start at 5:30, do we add another 15 minutes to the end time? Just what we put in writing. That's all I'm asking. Or do we still stay with 7:30?
Right. We don't actually put end times in our meetings. There's a start time and end time because we're doing a WebEx, and so we have to schedule it for so much time. But we don't put end times in our meetings. So again, that would really be, how do we manage the length of the meeting based on the agenda items, and based on the committee's preference, we can we can work on that.
Got it. Okay.
It depends on how much homework you do ahead of time.
Yeah. No, having never been to a real meeting, I didn't know there wasn't an end time. So I apologize for not knowing that, but now I know. Thanks.
You guys could finish in an hour if that were the case. I think, John, we actually had a council meeting that made it in under an hour once, right?
That's right. Think of it, meetings are like baseball games. There's really no clock. So it takes it as long or as short as it is necessary for you to conduct your business.
And the other thing is, if you guys are planning, and as you know, this is my last meeting with you as your council liaison. Erin Wojciechowski will be joining you at the next one. But as you're planning to go into your planning phase and potentially work with FEI on working on your action plan, you may end up deciding that there's a task force or a subcommittee that works initially, because that could take I could imagine that taking several hours in multiple sessions to do that work with FEI, and perhaps you end up dividing it up differently. So I wouldn't count on any meeting coming back under an hour if that's part of it.
Do we want to make a motion then to go in person for June with citizen statements and comments virtually? Okay, I will make the motion to go in person starting in June with our citizen statements and comments being virtual.
I'll second.
Heather, will you please
think about, do you also want to put in a start time? I know there were a couple who mentioned a different start time.
So, and wanna just add to start at 5:30?
Yes, I will amend the motion to start at 5:30 to allow for commuting. Heather, will you please take roll?
Yes. Sabula?
Aye.
Lyra?
Yes.
Roberts?
Aye.
Hess,
Aye.
Geyer,
Aye.
Yang,
Aye.
Scott,
Aye.
Lee.
Aye. Thank you, Heather.
You're welcome.
Okay.
Does
So
everyone
next
know
on-
where City Hall is?
And I just wanted to just real quick ask Moshe, since you'll be gone for June, July, but you'll be back in early August, right? So you're just missing 2?
I'm just gonna miss 2 meetings, I think.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
I should be back by August 10th, so any meeting after that I'll be available.
Okay.
Outstanding issues. We've got the Chief Oshkosh Monument Enhancement Project status report. So it's only been, I understand it's only been a week, but is there any progress or updates to mention?
Sure, I'd be happy to report on that. After the meeting, I had a discussion with City Manager Roloff about, what came out of the meeting. And also shared it with the department heads at the department head meeting that we have every Wednesday. So, as I mentioned, during the special meeting, I think City Manager Roloff and the department heads are excited to work on this project. So, City Manager Roloff decided to put it on the council agenda, and there's a section in the council agenda that just talks about future agenda items. And what he plans to report to the council tomorrow is that what happened at the DEI meeting, that the DEI forwarded the resolution, acknowledged the background information that I provided. And then in order to try to expedite the project, we discussed the idea of maybe having a huge group meeting with all the boards and commissions that were potentially interested. City Manager Roloff suggested that maybe he ask the staff liaisons to each of those groups to just ask those groups if they are interested in participating and having dialogue about the modification. But he thought that there may be some that, are fine with the recommendation that was brought forward by DEI. So he didn't think that it may be necessary to have all the groups together. So he was going to ask and then see what feedback we got in order to expedite the process. So that's kind of where we're at in terms of that portion of the project. And then the idea would be, once we have an idea of who's interested in participating, if any, then we can, discuss whether the project is modified in any way, and then try to come up with some sort of better estimate on what the cost might be, so we can try to, move forward as soon as possible. So that's my understanding in terms of what City Manager Roloff is going to report to the council tomorrow. And go ahead.
I was just going to share that I also had the opportunity to talk with the museum director, and he was very positive about moving forward on this project as a model. So that was very promising.
I know it's not specifically on the agenda, but also I'll mention that the APITA resolution that we discussed last time, that the group discussed, is also on the council agenda for tomorrow. So that will also be discussed as a resolution by the council.
Thank you for that update, John. John, do you think it's feasible to, by our next meeting, to have that decision whether we are going to have that joint workshop, and if so, to have a date set?
I would hope so. I think I think when City Manager Roloff shares this with the council, there's always the potential for the council to provide a variety of different directions. So I think, out of respect for that process, it's hard to know exactly, but, barring any, other items that might come up, I think there's a real good chance, because immediately after that meeting, we'll be in contact with those departments, and then they'll bring it to their staff liaisons, and then they'll convey it to their boards and commissions. So hopefully they'll be able to poll them without any formal action by their boards and commissions. If they require formal action or they want to have formal action, then it could slow it down a little bit. But if they are able to inquire and get that information, I would think we could move pretty quickly.
And just FYI, the kind of cool thing, since you guys are the last meeting or the last committee that meets in the month, they will all have had that opportunity to do that before the next time you meet, right?
Mm-hmm.
Great point by the mayor.
Does anyone have any other questions for John or Michelle or the rest of the group on this issue? Okay. Something that I would like to do before we adjourn is to take a moment to acknowledge Mayor Palmieri for her service to this group, and today is her official last meeting as our liaison. But I'm sure we'll see her popping in to our meetings. But we honor you. We appreciate what you have done for this committee. We appreciate your reflections, your expertise, and for really being the catalyst to creating this committee. So we are so appreciative for your service, and we have been grateful to work alongside you in this work.
Well, I certainly have been very honored to be part of this group in the first year, the inaugural year, and I do have to thank staff and former councils for initiating the discussion a handful of years back. So thank you for just being you and being engaged, and I'm not going to cry, but I will miss being your liaison. But I'm still your champion. I'm still your community voice, and certainly reach out to me with any concerns on any matter. And some of you I've known for a while, and others I've just gotten to know, but I can't wait to hop in and listen to a meeting and see you in person too. So thanks.
Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for being the
Thank you.
Well, on that feel-good motion, we can go ahead and make a motion to adjourn.
Wow, look at this, 6:32. Wow. I will make that motion to adjourn.
I'll
Second.
second. Good.
Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
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 Thank you, everyone. Have a good
We will
night.
see you in person. We can see your whole face.
Thank you.
Wow.
Person.
Hey, last meeting was 6:32 also, so.
Wow. Okay.